Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Air Commodore Grant Pinder. Today marks the 81st anniversary of the fall of Singapore, one of the worst military disasters to befall Australia and one of the greatest defeats in British history. Imperial defence planners had regarded Singapore as an impregnable fortress. But by the outbreak of the war in the Pacific, the military resources required for the defence of the Malaya Peninsula included modern fighter aircraft, and they had not been adequately provided. From the initial attack on the 8th of December 1941, the Japanese advanced rapidly through Malaya, overwhelming the British and Commonwealth forces. Singapore fell to the Japanese on the 15th of February 1942. Some 1,800 Australian soldiers had died in the fighting, and 15,000 immediately became prisoners of war. The island's fall marked one of the darkest periods in Australian history. Within a 7-week period, 22,000 Australians, including 71 nurses from the Australian Army Nursing Service, had the misfortune to become prisoners of war. In addition, 1,500 Australian civilians, men, women and children, were captured or interred across the region. It was a great time of anxiety and suffering, not only for the prisoners, but also for loved ones at home, who would have had little, if any, knowledge of the fate or even the whereabouts of the missing troops until the war ended. The significance of the prisoner of war experience to Australia's Second World War story can be measured by the profound loss of life. 1/3 of those who became prisoners did not survive their captivity. Those losses made up half of all the combat-related deaths suffered by the Australian servicemen and women during the Pacific War. And the suffering of the survivors continued long after their return home. Tonight, we will hear a confronting tragedy of one of the darkest periods of Australia's involvement in the Second World War. Through these painful events and the sacrifices made by individuals, we remain mindful of our history, but not held hostage to it. We emerge from these events ever changed, with a greater belief in ourselves and a deeper understanding of what it meant to be an Australian. We're reminded tonight that this is a place not of war, but of love and friendship. Love for friends and between friends, love of family and love of our country. Today, we remember the fall of Singapore. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors that returned home. This evening, we warmly welcome the family of Gunner John Francis Godfrey Alford, whose story will be told shortly. We're honoured to welcome His Excellency Mr. Anil Nair, Singapore High Commissioner to Australia, accompanied by Rear Admiral Edwin Leong, Chiefs of Staff, Naval Staff, Republic of Singapore Navy, and Rear Admiral Jonathan Early, Deputy Chief of Navy Australia. Major General Ibe Toshihiro, Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force, and Rear Admiral Thomas Hendershey, US Indo-Pacific Command, accompanied by Brigadier Mark Askoff, Headquarters Joint Operations Command, Australia. Major General Douglas Laidlaw, Head of Joint Support Services, Joint Capabilities Group, and the accompanying delegation. Captain Oga Yashihiro, Joint Staff College, Japan, and the accompanying delegation. We're also honoured to welcome Mr. David Ross, President Emeritus of the 8th Division Association, Mr. John King, President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, ACT branch, Mr. Roger Perry, on behalf of the 1st 19th Australian Infantry Battalion Association, Mr. Ray Warden, on behalf of the 2nd 19th Australian Infantry Battalion Association, Mr. Stuart Thompson, on behalf of the 2nd 20th Australian Infantry Battalion Association and all visitors who are joining us this evening to commemorate the 81st anniversary of the fall of Singapore. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome the members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family, visitors to the memorial, and students representing St John's School from Euroa, Victoria. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by visiting foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Catapult party, attention! Catapult party, present up!
Australians all at arms.
If able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and in operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Gunner John Francis Godfrey Alford. John Alford was born on the 26th of June 1919 in Murrurundi, a rural town in the Upper Hunter region of New South Wales, the son of William and Emily Alford. John Alford enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force on the 29th of May 1940 at the age of 21. His younger sister Lucy, who was about 7 years old, noted the excitement in Murrurundi as the troop train of the 8th Division stopped there. John, known to his family as Jack, had only a short time to say his goodbyes. As he passed by his grandparents' house, his grandmother said that she would pray for his safe return. He replied, "I don't expect to come home, Grandma." Having begun initial training, in August he was found absent without leave and confined to barracks for 3 days as punishment. This breach of military discipline would be the first in a long list. Posted to an artillery battery, in October, Alford was again found absent without leave and this time was awarded 21 days detention. In November, he transferred to the newly raised 2nd 15th Field Regiment. His new regiment unit began training at Ingleburn with 18-pounder guns, the type used during the First World War. Many of the guns, as noted in the regiment's history, were older than the gunners. In January 1941, the regiment moved into the new camp at Holsworthy in Sydney. The following month, Alford was again found absent without leave and confined to barracks for 14 days as punishment. In March, he was fined and confined to barracks for 7 days for breaking camp, being absent without leave, and failing to appear at a place of parade. In May, the 2nd 15th Field Regiment moved to Bathurst, where it carried out joint training exercises with the 8th Division's 27th Brigade for a week. Alford was found absent without leave twice during May and then again in June. He was admonished on numerous occasions and given 7 days detention. On the 29th of July, Alford and his regiment left Sydney on board the troop ship Katoomba, bound for overseas service. It was part of a convoy taking the 27th Brigade to Malaya and arrived in Singapore in mid-August. With growing unease about Japan's possible entry into the war, while the rest of the 2nd Australian Imperial Force had been sent to the Middle East, the 8th Division was sent to Malaya, Singapore and the islands to Australia's north. The 2nd 15th went into camp at Nee Soon in Singapore, where the men trained and were able to familiarise themselves with the jungle. The regiment received its first 25-pounders in late November, by which time Alford had been punished for failing to appear at a place of parade and was confined to barracks for 14 days. Later, he was charged with leaving his post before being relieved, earning 7 days detention. Throughout November and the start of December, it seemed that war with Japan was increasingly likely. Late in the afternoon of the 5th of December, the 2nd 15th began moving from Singapore to the state of Johor in Malaya to relieve the 2nd 10th Field Regiment. The 2nd 10th was operating on the east coast of Malaya and supported the 8th Division's 22nd Brigade. The 2nd 15th was headquartered and took up the position at the Kluang rubber estate. By the start of January 1942, the Japanese had advanced through Thailand and most of Malaya. On the 5th of January, the 2nd 15th moved north to reinforce the Allied troops that would fight the main Japanese force when it reached Johor. The regiment's 65th Battery went to Muar on the west coast under the command of the 45th Indian Brigade. The regiment's other batteries continued further north to join the 27th Brigade, which was to act as a shock absorber to the first contact with the Japanese, inflicting as many casualties as possible before falling back. The regiment's gunners were in almost constant action, providing artillery support for the infantry withdrawal along the Malayan Peninsula towards Singapore. By the end of January, the last Allied troops had crossed the causeway and reached Singapore. As the Japanese prepared their forces for the invasion of the island, during this static period from the end of December to the first week of February 1942, the regiment still fired over 1,000 rounds. With the surrender of Singapore on the 15th of February, those still alive now face life as prisoners of war, shipped to work on the Burma-Thailand Railway or to other parts of the Japanese Empire. Gunner John Alford, however, would be spared the ordeals and suffering of a prisoner of war. On the 23rd of January, he was declared missing. With no news of his fate, he was later presumed dead. Today, he is commemorated on the Singapore Memorial alongside more than 24,000 casualties of the Commonwealth Land and Air Forces who have no known grave. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Gunner John Francis Godfrey Alford, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms and the hope of a better world.
If able, please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catapult party, present, catapult party, shoulder,
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
catapult party, outwards, turn.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres, or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.